before we get started and just talk a little bit, I guess really quick parentheses, what we are doing is my family and I were moving to Japan as missionaries over there. That's kind of just so there's no mystery. So that's what's happening. But before we go on, I want to just kind of read to you or two stories out of the Bible. There's one in Genesis chapter 12. Of anybody ever heard of a guy named Abraham? If you grew up in church, maybe your relation to Abraham is Father Abraham, and you put your hand out and your foot out and have many sons, that kind of thing. But in Genesis chapter 12 is where we see, if you have little titles over the headings of your scriptures, it says the call of Abraham. And it's calling Abraham out of the land, and he's in Haran at this point. And sometimes when you see all these biblical names, it might not mean anything to you. Like, what's Haran? Where's Kadesh Barnea? Where's Jerusalem? Like, is that like Geismar to New Orleans, or is that Geismar to New York? Like, I don't know. What does that mean? So basically, when Abraham was a young man, we don't know exactly how old he was, he left with his father, and they left Ur, which is basically in the ancient times of Babylonia. So it would be akin to saying, hey, you guys used to live in Miami, right? Anybody knows where Miami, Florida is? Okay, better geography now. So, and he said, hey, look, I want you to go to Geismar, roughly, just so we can understand. And so Abraham leaves Miami, and he goes all the way up just the way you would travel at that time. Say he goes all the way up by foot, right? There's no planes, trains, or automobiles at that time. And so they go all the way up by foot, and they manage to make it all the way up to Atlanta. And when Atlanta, I'm just saying, he left from Ur and he went to Haran. And so that's about how far he traveled, from Miami to Atlanta. And his destination was to come to Geismar. And when he gets in Haran, his father passes away in Haran. And that's where we get in Genesis chapter 12, starting again, saying God calling him to go to Canaan. And in our little analogy here is to go to Geismar. And eventually he leaves, and that's about how far he ends up traveling. He goes, I mean, can you imagine doing that by foot? Leaving Miami? I mean, I don't know how long that takes, about a drive, 8-hour drive, about 8-hour drive from here to Atlanta, something like that. But so that was the journey that he was making. And he set out on this journey, and for whatever reason, he knew that he was supposed to go to the land of Canaan. In our analogy, he was supposed to go to Geismar. But he stopped in Atlanta. Why did he stop? We don't know specifically. Maybe business was good in Haran. Maybe it was just a little bit too hard. I mean, imagine traveling with his father, all of his livestock, everything that he owned. He's like, hey, things are here. Let's stop here. And then in Haran, his father dies, and eventually God talks to him again and says, hey, look, I called you to go to Canaan, and so you need to go. And eventually he takes up his stuff and starts going. And I guess just like in Abraham's life, and I don't know if this has ever happened to y'all, sometimes, and I don't know why, we don't want it to often be like this. Sometimes it takes a tragic or a really earth-shattering event to happen in your life to wake you up to really what's important. Anybody ever had one of those happen to you? No? Maybe a few of you? Maybe someone don't want to admit. But sometimes it's something really extreme happens to your life, and then you're it kind of puts things into perspective. And that's what happens to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And then there's another story in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. So the Israelites, y'all remember the Israelites in Exodus, right? And they go through the Red Sea and all of that. And so then they're wandering in the wilderness, and they're coming in, and they're trying to go into the promised land. So this is after they've gone down. This is not after, if you guys are familiar with the story, they wandered for 40 years in the desert, right? So this is before that happens. So before they're going to go in and conquer the land, they send out some spies to go and look at the land and say, hey, what does it look like? And they come back. Does anybody know the story? Anybody familiar with that story? They came back with an awesome report, right? No, they came back. They said, yeah, the land is great, but there's no way we can do this. And so 10 of them, there's 12 spies that went. 10 of them went and 10 of them came back with the, hey, we can't do it. And 2 of the 12 said, hey, no, we can still do it. So they go and tell the people, and everybody's scared. They don't want to do it. And they're like, no, we can't do it. And God had commanded them to go and take the land. But they're like, we're. I mean, can you imagine? These guys were, in the biblical times, they had a pillar of fire that followed them by night and a cloud that covered them by day. like in a miraculous event that happened every single day. And still they thought, we probably can't do this. And so they're like, no, we won't do it. And so Moses comes back and he tells them, hey, God said you guys won't go, so you're going to wander around in the desert for 40 years since y'all won't go. Because the spies spent 40 days in the land spying it out, and they came back and said, for every day that you're in the land, you're going to spend a year in the desert. And so they said, oh, no. Okay, we'll go. Well, you've got our attention, we'll go. And so the next day, they say, hey, we're going to go and we're going to conquer the land. And then Moses says, look, I've prayed, and the Lord said, don't go because you're going to get defeated. And they're like, no, we're going to go anyways, we're going to do it. And so they go, and what happens? They get defeated. And they retreat back, and then that's when they end up wandering for 40 years in the desert. So you may ask yourself, like, what in the world do these two stories have anything to do with the guy going and doing missionary work in Japan? Right? That seems completely unrelated. But many a times there are things that, I don't know how everybody is a Christian or not, or things that you feel called to do, but you're like, I don't know if I can do it. Is it possible to be called to do something and like Abraham, go halfway and settle and not do what you were called to do? Or is it possible that you're like, yes, I want to do it, and you don't do it and you miss it? There was the old expression, a day late and a dollar short. There's this one scripture that my dad used to say was his favorite scripture. It was in Jonah chapter 3, verse 1. And it says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And so just to know that we often get second chances and second opportunities to do things, but maybe it's not always that's the case. And so I think there are times that God will do whatever he needs to do in our lives to try to push us on to do something and put us in an uncomfortable situation. And I guess technically, talking here, nobody knows who I am, right? I guess you have to take everything that I'm telling you that hopefully this guy's telling me the truth, because but if you don't want to believe me, I guess you don't have to. But so what I'm going to share a little bit more about today, just with you guys, is just to share, just like Abraham went on this journey, and he eventually ended up where he was supposed to go. A little bit of a journey of my life, and I'm nobody important, nobody extra special, no more special than anybody sitting at any of these tables here today. But just hopefully you might be able to look at this journey that I've gone through and might see something that it might encourage your life to do something of whatever it is particularly that you feel called that you need to do. So even though I'm going to share somewhat about my own testimony and what we're doing, and hopefully, it's not about me. And so that's when I was a young kid, about that young right there. That's me with the little Mickey Mouse shirt. That's my parents. We moved to Brazil to go be missionaries. I don't know if you can see. We moved to Brazil to go be missionaries in the Amazon River Basin. And so I was 4, my brother was 7. I think my dad was like 36, 37 at that time. And we moved to the Amazon Basin, not knowing exactly even where we were going to live. I think I have this next slide here. So that's where we moved to, just as a point of reference, because when you say the Amazon Basin, it's I think technically if you take like the United States, you can fit it like right here. It just doesn't look that big on maps, just because most of our maps, the U.S. is right in the middle, right, and it looks the biggest. But at that point, there were like 40,000 or something river villages that had never heard the gospel ever before. And so that's where we went. And the only way to get to the place where we lived, and we didn't live in a thatched hut. It was a city, had about 250,000 people. But in order to get to that city, there was 2 ways, or technically 3, but really 2 ways. You either got there by boat or you got there by plane. Or if you had a jacked up 4x4 and you were up for an adventure and you had a winch and you wanted to try to go through the roads. But my dad went over there to go be a Bible school teacher, and that's what he did. He taught Bible school for many, many years, and went into the river villages. And so back in 2002, we come back to the United States. So I'd spent from 4 years old to about 15 years old living in Brazil. Spoke Portuguese, and then next thing you know, my parents tell me, hey, we're moving back to the United States. We come back to the United States, get here on a Monday, and then Wednesday school starts, and I start as a high school freshman in a public school in Central, and I don't know a soul. I mean, I know a bunch of kids often like going to high school is already somewhat of a challenge, but like, man, I didn't know anybody. And so, word got around like, oh, this guy's from Brazil or whatever. And so you get the weird questions, right? And I don't blame people. If you haven't been outside of the U.S. and you don't know, then you don't know, right? So like, people would say like, hey, did you guys wear clothes over there? And I was like, no, man, we wore them little string things, like you see on the TV. And it was like, I had one guy ask me like, man, did y'all have kangaroos in your backyard? And I said, what? He's like, kangaroos, he's like, in Brazil off the coast of Australia or something like that. I said, no, it's just like straight down south, And then somebody asked me if it was fun to fly over the Atlantic. And I said, and again, I'm trying to give these people the benefit of the doubt. I was like, man, it's mainly the Gulf of Mexico, but they're like, I thought Brazil was in Europe. But most people, if you don't get out of your own little bubble, you just don't know. And I don't fault people for that. And but I think that's the case, not just with people in Central, but if you go all over Louisiana, we find that happens. So we come back and go to school, do all of that fun stuff here, and but always had a heart to do missions work, and I always thought that at one point I'd go back to Brazil and continue doing what my parents and whatnot were doing there. But no, didn't know when, didn't know where. So went to high school, went to college, got a degree in architecture from LSU. Started working as an architect. I've been doing that for the past 10 years, and got married in 2014, and started having babies. Right, that's what you do when you get married, right? Or at least you try, right? And so, but my wife and I, we had always had a heart or desire to do missions work, right? And so we strategically tried to position our lives in such a way that when the time came for us to respond to something, that we could, right? I think many a times, and again, and I'm just saying this not to, because there's plenty of people that do way better things than we're doing, but many times you're like, man, I want to do some kind of missions work or whatever it is, the work that you want to do, and the job you get, the cars you buy, the house you buy, everything that you do, you set up your life that you're locked in. Like you couldn't do anything, you couldn't serve, you couldn't help anybody if you wanted to. And nobody told you to make your life that way. You did it on your own. And so we knew that we wanted to respond to this, and so we always lived on one income. We always had less than my peers had. We always drove older cars. We always had a smaller house. Our kids always had less things. But we knew that when the time came, we could say yes to something. And many a times in America, I find that like we just get caught up in all of our things, and we can't say yes to doing something different. Or maybe you're even wanting a career change. You're wanting to change your job, but you're like, man, I can't. I got my truck, I got my wife's car, we got the house, we got this. I couldn't change if I wanted to because of the life that I built for myself. And so for a number of years, we were at our local church. Me and my wife led worship at our, worked full-time job and still led worship at our church. Still did that. Still busy about doing something, right? If you don't know what you ought to do, the best thing to do is do nothing, right? No, I don't think so. I think if you don't know what you ought to do, the best thing to do is to continue to do something. Because, the whole saying is a whole lot easier to steer a moving vehicle than to steer it once it's, if it's just parked. And so we continued busy, and I encourage you, maybe you're like, I want to change, I want to do something else. Like, don't just do nothing. Like, continue to do something, because it's a whole lot easier to get directed or to move if you're in the middle if you're doing something. And it really, I'll jump to last year. Anybody, I guess men here, nothing against the ladies. Maybe you guys, y'all will understand this from a different point of view. But any men, you guys have kids? Anybody have kids here? Anybody's wife ever went through what they call a nesting period? Yep. Any women have kids? And it does not mean it's a derogatory term, but my wife says it, so I figured it's safe to say, right? You go through a nesting period where you're trying to get everything ready before the baby gets here and whatnot. And at the beginning of 2023, my wife started just like cleaning out the house, started getting rid of stuff. It was like, do we need this? I was like, man, what's going on? Are you pregnant? Are you? She's like, no, she wasn't pregnant. Thank God, we already got 4 kids, and I think hopefully we're good with that. And but she just started just getting rid of stuff. And it was like she didn't know why. She would just wake up in the middle of the night. It's like, I need to get rid of things. I need to get rid of things. And so in beginning of 20, she started getting rid of things. And and in the beginning of 23, I decided, you know what? I'm going to quit my job. It's like, this is going to be a brilliant idea. I mean, it wasn't reckless. I had started doing some real estate investing on the side. And I was like, man, if I want to be able to respond to do more missions work and stuff, if I work a full-time job at an architecture firm and I'm there from Monday through Friday every single day, I'm locked into that. I get 2 weeks paid vacation. Like, how much can you really do? So I decided, hey, if I invest in real estate, at least there can be an unequal distribution of the amount of time that you put into the payout that you get. It would free up my time in order to be able to do more work, help my dad do more mission stuff. And so I quit my job, or I quit my job. I said I was going to quit. They're like, hey, would you stay on part-time, to at least we can figure out somebody to replace you. I said, hey, great. And so I thought that I was going to be this like mega real estate investor. Anybody ever done real estate investing or something like that? It's super easy, right? You just go, and it's a really quick way to get rich if you want to. It's a really quick way to get poor if you want to as well. You can win big and you can lose big. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. But anyways, and so I went on a few mission trips with my dad in April of 23, and just knowing that I believe looking back we can see God setting up the steps. And so in April of 23 last year, I was going with my dad. We were going to Japan. And like I said, many times, God takes like a shattering event to shake you, and not that this was all about me, anyways. But in April of 2023, me and my wife and two of my kids, we got on a flight with my dad to go to Japan, and he was going to go teach some Bible school courses over there. So we get on a flight, Baton Rouge to Houston, and then in the flight from Houston to Tokyo, my dad passed away on the flight. And so we're sitting in the back. And my dad, somebody from another church had given him some miles or whatnot and upgraded him to first class. He had been having like sciatic nerve pain. He had just gone through a prostate cancer treatment, had overcome that. So we knew my dad wasn't in the best of health, but it was a surprise to us all. I'm sitting in the back of the plane because we're like way in the back, right? And my wife was like, hey, you need to go check on your dad. And I was like, check my dad. Like, he's in first class. He's got a refrigerator. He's got a bed, like, why am I going to go check on my dad? And plus, like, I got to pass like 5 curtains between there. If you ever been on the plane, they close the curtains, like, don't go past the curtain. And I was like, no, he's fine. He's fine. He's got a fridge. And she's like, no, I think you ought to go check on your dad. And so I was like, okay. So I went. I got my daughter. Let's go up there. So at least if I get in trouble for the curtains, at least I got a kid with me. It's And so we go up there, and I go, and it looks like my dad's sleeping, but he had passed away on the flight. And so we do the whole thing, like, hey, is a doctor on the plane? And so people came out. We did CPR. They turned the plane around. We ended up emergency landing in Seattle. And then the paramedics come, and they try to work, and they're like, hey, man, we gotta, like, it's been an hour and a half, and he's not responding to anything. We've got to stop. Are you okay? And at that point, the only scripture that came to mind to me is to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And I said, so, what you're not, I said, he's not there, so you're just working on a body at this point. So at that point, it was like, man, it was like, we didn't make it there, right? And it was, my dad was pastoring the church and also heading up a Bible school. And then if you ever in a business and there's a father-son relationship and the father goes away, everybody then looks at you, right? Anybody ever been in that position? It might not have been a father or son or the leader, and you're like the next, and something happens, and everybody looks at you like, okay, like, what's up? And it's like, hey, yo, I'm not the guy. And they're like, are you going to be the pastor of the church? And I said, no, me and my dad, we had already talked about this. And like, no, I'm not going to be the pastor. And but the pressure to say yes to something that wasn't, I know what God had called me to do. I mean, the familiar pressure, the pressure from people. And again, I'm saying this things like not for anybody to feel sad for me or pity for me or anything, but just to see maybe you have gone through something similar, and hopefully there's something from this that you can take and hopefully learn and apply to your life. And as hard as it was to say, no, I'm not going to continue my dad's legacy in this way kind of thing, not that it's about his legacy, But it was like, no, I needed to say no because I knew this wasn't something that God had called me to do. And if sometimes if you say yes to something and you step in somewhere, guess what? Somebody else can't step into that same spot. And so you end up taking a position and not allowing somebody else for whatever reason. Maybe it's arrogance on your part that you think that you want to fulfill other people's expectations. Really, a lot of times fulfilling other people's expectations is often somewhat of a form of pride of your own because you don't want other people to look down upon you. But I said no to that. And then eventually there was a good friend of ours that came and took over and is now pastoring the church. And because I still knew that God was calling us to do missions work somewhere. Didn't know where, but we were still going to remain faithful doing whatever God had called us to do right where we were. And then I went and did some more missions trips to Brazil for my dad, and actually went to Africa doing some stuff over there with a Bible school graduation. And man, like going to, I had never been to Africa. It takes a long time to get there. Anybody has ever been to the southern part of Africa? Like, dude, it takes like, when I looked at the flights, it was like 36 hours. Like, it is a long trek to get there. It was like here to the Middle East flying down. It's a long ways to get there. You don't realize how far away it is and how big Africa is as well. But, going there, you see people that, because I remember seeing poverty in Brazil, growing up in Brazil, seeing people like they just live on the river, but at least if you live on the river, you can catch fish and stuff, and you can at least feed yourself. But there are people there that, I mean, you can see people that you talk about living on less than $1 a day, like that they would they had like ginormous bags of charcoal just like lined all over the street, and they were just trying to sell charcoal in order to make a living. I mean, I don't think charcoal probably sold for very much. And they would eat one meal a day because that's all they had. Like they could only afford to eat one meal a day. So you go to a place like that, and it's like, man, and it's like, Lord, maybe this is what we need to do. And I come back and it's like, no, that's not it. And we ended up going to Japan, and I was like, look, we're going to go to Japan, anything. I mean, if that trip was like, maybe, God, we just need closure, right? Like you had this really traumatic trip. And it's like, if you at least go there and come back, at least you can, close the book, and so it's nice and neat. You can close that chapter, move on, 2024, here we come, right? And it's like, no, I think we should still go. And people are like, why do you want to go to Japan? I was like, I don't know, but I think we ought to go. And so we go, and long story short, we met with the families and everything there, and it's like, no, I think this is where we need to be, and we're going to be here working with this church here. And we beginning of January this year, we started taking the steps in order to move I got me and my wife, I got 4 kids. My oldest kid is 7, so we got 7, 5, 4, she just turned 4, and almost 2. So we got a little bunch. They're about 2 years apart each. And so that's what we're responding to now. And it's like, and I don't know if it was just specifically like being on a flight with my dad passing away, that it's like, I'm not Father Abraham, right? But in the sense that like when Abraham, we can imagine him leaving Ur, going up to Haran, is like, oh, Lord, I know you called us to go all the way down to there, but for whatever reason, they just got stagnant and they stayed. And it wasn't until his father passed away that he's like, no, I'm going to go back to what is it that I know I was called to do. Let me go back and revisit that thing. And so he go back and revisit it, and guess what? No, I still need, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I still need to keep moving on. And so that's what we're going to be doing. Hopefully in November this year, we're going to be moving. And I'll show you guys some maps real quick, really about what we're doing. And we're going around talking to a lot of churches, talking to a lot of people, because when you move as missionaries, you need other people that are willing to help you, to support you to do the work that you're going to do there. And if anybody here decides that you want to help support us and help give, great. But if you don't, hopefully there's something that you were blessed with by this, regardless. Because there was this is a great quote by William Carey. He was going to be a missionary in India, and he was going like deep into India. And he said, as people were coming, he told people, he said, look, I'll go into the deep wells of India if you'll be willing to hold the rope for me. And so we're like, hey, we're going to be willing to go. Hopefully there's some people stateside that are willing to hold the rope for us, because if not, you fall in the well, right? And you can't get out. So I'll talk a little bit just to kind of about where we're going. So Louisiana, Tokyo, Japan, if you didn't know. just, had to put something like that in there because of all the comments from Brazil, thinking it's next to Australia. Maybe some people didn't know where Japan, but I think most, yeah. I should have meant to go in this way, right? Um, but and so this is so like kind of just zoomed into Tokyo. It took me a while to figure this out, but basically I think they have prefectures in Japan, which are most akin to what we would call states here, though they're not nearly as big. Most of their prefectures are more similar to like the state sizes up in the Northeast, right, of the United States. In the Northeast, when you get like Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, like those things are pretty like the size of a parish in Louisiana. And so right outside of the Tokyo prefecture, right here, it says Paz Church, is where one of the churches is that we're going to be working with. And there's another church down here on the southern part, and that's where we're basically going to be right there for the moment. Hopefully by the end of this year, somewhere up here, we're going to be starting another church. And in this little area here, you look at this map, and you're like, oh man, that's massive, that's huge, right? And I think it's, if you add all the numbers up here, it's close to 40 million people that live right here in this map area, right? Do you get how big this is? Yes, no, maybe so. So that's, y'all see all the white lines? The white lines stay the same. That's the same size. Here's Slidell, New Orleans, Baton Rouge. I'm not sure if it goes up as far as like Amite up here. That's the same size. Can you imagine 40 million people living in this area? And when you say 40 million people, oftentimes it's like 40 million people. That's like, how many people is that? Like it's a number so big. That'd be like everybody in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama all living right here.
Like Godzilla does so many
Right, right. And but even then, it's like you think of like all the people from Houston, everybody from Dallas, like everybody from Shreveport coming down. Like that's a ton of people that live in this little area. Yeah, that's all of those people coming in. And I had never thought about Japan this way, but really in Japan there is very, very, very few Christians. How are we doing on time, man? 12:21. Okay. There's only 0.5% of the population in Japan that are Christians. And you don't at least as a missionary doing missions work, you don't really think of it, hey, go somewhere in Africa or in India or go somewhere in Latin America. That's where they need it, right? And because when I was in Africa, technically where I went to Zambia, and you would see a church here, and you'd see a church across the street, and a church over there, and a church over there. Like, there was no shortage of churches. Was there a lot of physical needs? Yes, absolutely. There was tons of physical needs. Same thing in Brazil. There's tons of flavors of churches of all kinds. You pick your flavor. You want a more traditional, you want a more liberal. There's all the flavors if you want. But in Japan, there's very, very, very few. 0.5%. There's more Christians in Louisiana than there are in the nation of Japan, if you think about it that way. And one thing I didn't even know. Anybody ever seen that movie Silence? Yeah, a few people. In Japan was actually where one of the biggest persecutions of Christians in modern history was. For a period of about 250 years, if it was found out that you were a Christian, you were beheaded, you were crucified, you were burned, you were drowned, you were tortured, you were sent to a concentration camp, one of the three. And so most of the Christians in Japan fled to the southern part of Japan for 250. I mean, maybe I'm the only. I told you I wasn't going to pop this thing, and I'm just like pop, 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 pop. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like that Christians, it was banned. And if you watch that movie, don't watch it if you got little kids. Don't watch it with little kids because it's pretty gory. But so eventually in 1873, Christianity becomes legal again. Things start moving along, start coming along. And then you got World War II that happens in 1945. And a lot of the Christians had moved down to southern Japan, and two of the cities where you had some of the biggest Christian populations and Christian things happening. Not that it's about buildings and whatnot, but finally they start building buildings, and it's like, okay, we got something. Was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And do y'all know what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Right? If you've been through history at all, right, the two atoms, boom, boom. Can you imagine finally like having 250 years of persecution finally starting to come back, and the next thing you know, like your whole city gets obliterated? And post-war Japan, they basically Japan moved to a very consumeristic, materialistic society because the emperor, right, got dethroned. The emperor is no longer God. But the majority of the country is atheistic. I mean, technically, there's some Buddhism and Shintoism happening there, but that's the majority of the country now. I was talking to who was I? I was talking to you earlier. Like they're a very clean society. Like as far as like standard of living, like I think Japan has one of like the highest ages and one of the best standards health wise and all of this. So like from the world standpoint, if you're not a Christian and you're just looking from a world standpoint, just strictly humanistic, it's like, hey, they got it made. Like we need to go to Japan and go learn from them. I mean, technically, you could walk on the streets of Tokyo just about anywhere at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and not be worried about any kind of crime happening to you. You know, talking to the pastor there, he said, "Yeah, I'd send my daughter out at 2 in the morning. She could go walk and go get something to come back, and I wouldn't worry." Like, would you do that here? You know, probably. But right, we got a lot of Christians here, and so like from a humanistic standpoint, you can look at them and say, "Hey, why they don't need anything?" But if you're a Christian and you believe in the gospel, then that changes that story altogether. That's not to say that we want to go over there and then next thing you see them start shooting each other up like we do here. And so that's basically, so we're going to be working with the same missions organization that we were working with when we were in Brazil. And this is the church there. Really, the average church size in Japan is about 30 to 40 people. So they're not mega churches. And the church here, they meet in a coffee shop. So the church owns a coffee shop because they were trying to find a place to rent to meet as a church, and they kept getting denied. Nobody would rent to them because they were a religious organization. And I said, "Is that legal?" And they're like, "Don't know if it's legal, but it's what happened," right? And so they spent some time praying. They said, "Hey, what if we open up a coffee shop and we rent this room as a coffee shop, and then we still happen to have church here?" And so that's what they did. So they have a coffee shop, and that's where they have church. And this is, at least for us, a scripture that we're standing on in Amos 9:13, and it's basically talking about when the plowman will overtake the reaper. Because in Japan, Japanese people are just, and again, I'm no expert in Japanese people, so if there's somebody here that's more of an expert than me, then you can correct me after this. They were very slow to accept anything that's not natively Japanese. And so from a missionary standpoint, you go, and it might be 10 years before when you meet somebody, before they'll actually listen to a gospel message from you. And so our timeline, we're looking to head out over there in November of this year. And if you guys want to scan the little QR code right there, you can check out our website and see a little bit more about what we're doing. But yeah, as we were talking earlier, it's like, man, Japan would never have been a place that I would have decided to go. I mean, if I had my choice, I'd have picked somewhere in Latin America because I already speak Portuguese. I speak a good bit of Spanish. It'd be a whole lot easier. If you ever looked at the Japanese alphabet, it doesn't look anything like English, and it doesn't sound anything like English either. But we're just trying to be obedient to what we believe God's telling us to do. And I'm not the smartest. We're not the best, but we can obey. And that's what we're doing. And hopefully, in sharing a little bit today, maybe you take something from it that you ain't got to be the brightest or the smartest, but if you can be obedient, I think you can. We can all do some good.